Why are you crying? Richard's firm voice broke the silence of the luxurious bathroom. He was a millionaire accustomed to resolving any business, but in that moment, faced with the weeping cleaning lady, he felt lost like never before. Before that moment in the bathroom, Richard Collins's world was a straight line. He wakes at 5:30 a.m. in the glass-enclosed penthouse of the Upper East Side, the city still blue below. The tall mirror reveals a man in a perfect suit, meticulously styled hair, and a watch that costs more than many cars. Agenda, Ava. No surprises, he says into the speakerphone as he adjusts his tie. Meeting at 8 a.m. on 5th Avenue. Lunch with investors at Bryant Park Grill. Call with Boston at 4 p.m. Cut the lunch. Time is money, remember. He smiles coldly. The driver drops him off on the sidewalk of 5th Avenue near 52nd Street. Glass doors open with icy air conditioning. The lobby is marble, steel, and silence. Executives in suits hurry past. Shoes shine, eyes too. Richard passes through it all like he owns the scene. "Good morning, Mr. Collins," says the security guard. "Keep the doors closed to reporters. Image is priority," he replies without looking. In the mirrored elevator, he doesn't see people. He sees utility. Each floor, a graph. Each voice, a cost. Upon arriving at the penthouse, the team is already waiting for him in a line in the meeting room overlooking Central Park. "Guys, numbers, no stories," he says, leaving his jacket draped over the back of his chair. "Sir, the social project," a director ventures. "Cut 30%. Charity doesn't pay dividends." He doesn't even blink. Weak smiles. Heads nod. No one objects. Richard rules by awkward silences. If you're 3 minutes late, you're out. If you make a mistake, you're out, is the unwritten rule everyone knows. When an intern spills coffee, he speaks softly, like a sentence. Clean it up and learn. Ava, his assistant, is the only one who approaches. Richard, sometimes, people are changeable. What matters is the result. He cuts dryly and walks. Wherever he goes, cleaning happens without him noticing. Carts of products lean discreetly against the wall. Hurried footsteps disappear when the CEO's door closes. Richard doesn't see who turns on the lights before him and turns them off after. On the other side of this polished world stands Grace Miller, 38 years old, with chemically scarred hands and a courage that doesn't show in photographs. She lives in Jackson Heights, Queens, in a small apartment near 82nd Street. The window overlooks the elevated subway. The noise is her companion. "It'll be okay, Ethan," she whispers to her son, adjusting the blanket. "Mom, do you promise to be back before sunrise?" he asks, his voice thin. "I promise, and I'll bring pancakes." She forces a smile. Grace leaves as night is still turning to dawn. She goes downstairs, clutching the handle of her bag with gloves, rags, and a notebook. On the E subway toward Manhattan, the car smells of metal and coffee. She reads the English note she's handwritten. Appointment, hospital, schedule. A man next to her dozes. A woman listens to music. At work, she enters through the service dock. Card in the reader, cold lights. The basement corridors have cement floors, boxes and carts. "Good shift, Grace," says Rosa, another employee, tying up her hair. "One day at a time," Grace replies, adjusting her cloth mask. She knows the building better than any executive. She knows where the floors creak, which windows let in the 5th Avenue breeze, where the sunrise hits the pantry first. At 5:50 a.m., she's already there with a bucket, mop, and spray bottle. While the upper floors still dream, she wipes down the glass tables, changes trash bags, polishes the metalwork. "And good morning," she says to a young analyst who pretends not to hear. Grace repeats, "Don't take it to heart," and she goes. On the 38th floor, the cafeteria smells of toasted bread and an espresso machine. She wipes down the counter, collects used capsules, and finds crumpled notes with large words: goal, bonus, acquisition. For each word, a sigh. When she needs to rest her back, she rests her hand on her lower back and looks out the window. The sun rising behind the midtown buildings feels like a promise. "Mom, have you had coffee yet?" Ethan asks via text. "Later. First, I win the day," she replies with a smiling emoji. Grace works in silence, but her mind speaks loudly. Bills, schedules, exams. The phone rings with unfamiliar numbers, and her heart races. She breathes, remembers the doctor in Boston, the waiting list, the name of the surgeon everyone says is the best, and she prays with her eyes open as she scrubs the floor. In the glass hallway, two executives pass by, laughing loudly. "The cleaning lady will manage," one of them says, without even looking. "The cleaning lady always does," the other replies, as if Grace were part of the wall. Still, she has a sweet way of caring for what isn't hers. She straightens chairs with precision, closes forgotten laptops, picks up a fallen coat and hangs it on the right back. In the women's restroom, she checks the dispensers, changes the paper, cleans the mirrors, tests the faucets. Everything gleams, and when no one's looking, she rests her forehead on her hand for 5 seconds, the exact length of a stubborn tear. "Be strong, Grace," she whispers, wiping her eyes before they turn red. The top-floor conference room looked like an aquarium overlooking Central Park. Screens were on, graphs were rising and falling, and voices were measured. Richard Collins tapped his pen impatiently on the table. "Let's get to the point. Where do we cut?" he asked dryly. The CFO changed the slide. OPEX reduction, 12%. Facilities and cleaning outsourced at night. Hardly anyone sees it, no one complains. It saves money now. Richard nodded unemotionally. "Do it. Today," he said, lifting his chair with a slight creak. 2 minutes. "I'm going to the bathroom." The hallway was cold and silent. The white overhead light traced rectangles on the marble floor. As he pushed open the door to the penthouse bathroom, Richard smelled lavender and alcohol. The long sinks reflected his suit. The automatic faucets gleamed. Then he heard it, a short, muffled sob hidden in one of the stalls, a second sob. "Hello?" His voice came out louder than he intended. The stall door opened slowly. Grace, the cleaning lady, was holding a crumpled piece of paper and a scratched cell phone. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. "Sorry, sir. I'll be right out," she said, wiping her face hurriedly. Richard's gaze hardened. The usual instinct, to end, to move on, to get back to the numbers. "What are you crying about?" she asked with automatic disdain, like someone asking about a misplaced cup. Grace tried to respond, but her voice faltered. She took a breath, clutching the paper tightly. I can't lose this job," she managed. "No one's talking about you." Richard straightened his tie, already half-turned toward the door. "I'm just asking why you're crying in the boardroom." She stared at him, as if deciding to jump off a cliff. Because you're going to get cuts." The sentence came out short, sharp. "I heard it in the service elevator. They're cutting back on the night cleaning. If I miss this shift, my son won't survive the surgery." The echo of the sentence bounced off the walls and came back unbroken. Richard paused. "What's up?" "He needs surgery. The doctor gave him a deadline." Grace choked back tears, trying to sound firm. "I'll scrape together every extra hour to pay the hospital bill. I have no one to help. And the insurance." The question came out automatically. Technically, the waiting list and the line. She showed the crumpled paper. A budget with underlined numbers. "If I miss the payment, they'll take his name off the list. I can't miss it. I can't lose this job." Outside, distant laughter erupted in the hallway. Someone told a joke in the conference room. Inside, only the sound of water running on its own from a faucet. Richard took a deep breath, irritated by the delay he had created. Time is money, but her words carried the weight of a living thing. "You shouldn't be..." He searched for some norm to cling to. crying in here. I tried to hold it in. Grace squeezed her eyes shut. I'm sorry. Just, please, don't let them take me off shift. I can handle it. I sweep, I scrub, I go without sleep. Just don't cut my hours. Richard looked away to the mirror, as if there might be an answer. He saw his suit, his watch, his usual posture. He also saw a fragile, stubborn woman behind him, like a detail that cleaning never erases. The human. This isn't personal, he said, returning to his practical tone. It's just a budget decision. For me, it's life or death. The sentence came without drama, simply truth. Budget decision is my son breathing. Or not? Grace's hand slipped, and the phone nearly fell. She held it up, trembling, and unlocked the screen. A photo, a skinny boy, a crooked smile, a blue cap. Ethan, 8 years old. He likes dinosaurs. She held it up for a moment, as if showing off a talisman. He asked if I'd be back before sunset. I said yes. The cold lights gave her skin a pale glow. The crumpled paper towel balled up in her fingers. I know you don't have to. I know. Her voice almost trailed off. Just don't let me leave. Richard opened his mouth to end the conversation. I'll check with HR would have sufficed. Or talk to your supervisor. Shield words, ladder words to get out of there. But nothing came out immediately. Instead, he listened to his own breathing and, for the first time that day, realized he was late for something that couldn't fit on a spreadsheet. The silence was heavy. The air in the bathroom felt colder. He pulled up his sleeve and checked his watch. The meeting awaits me, he said, trying to get back on track. I'm waiting too, Grace replied softly, as if speaking to fate. Waiting for a chance. Her words hung between them like a glass about to fall. From the hallway, Ava called, Richard, everything okay in there? 2 minutes, he replied, never taking his eyes off Grace. She took a step back, straightened her posture, picked up the ball of paper from the floor and threw it in the trash. She wiped the back of her hand across her eyes and took a deep breath, her dignity invisible. I'll finish the floor, she said simply. And the bathroom has to be perfect. Richard observed the precision of her gestures, closing the dispenser, aligning the liquid soap, wiping the cloth with precise movements, as if each detail guaranteed a little piece of the future. He pushed open the door, now outside, and paused with his hand on the handle. The glass reflected his split-in-half image. Across the room, the meeting room was buzzing. Slides, goals, do it today, messages. On this side, a phrase still lingered in the air. If I lose this job, my son won't survive the surgery. Between the click of the doorknob and the distant clatter of cutlery in the pantry, something, small, uncomfortable, insistent, stirred inside him. It didn't yet have a name, but it had begun. The door remained ajar. The hallway waited. So did the day. On the 35th floor, 2 analysts chuckled near the breakfast nook. Did you see that? One of them murmured. I didn't see anything, but I've already heard about it. She's desperate, it seems. Imagine depending on a cleaning salary to survive in New York. The laugh was dry, full of contempt. Grace came in to collect the cups, and their eyes were sharp as razors. She pretended not to hear, bending down to pick up a fallen coffee pod. Her heart was pounding, her face was burning, but she kept her head down. On the 32nd floor, another employee blurted out in the hallway, "Poor desperate thing, do you think tears hold a contract?" The words fell like stones. Grace's grip tightened on the cleaning cart, the metal cold in her sweaty hands. She tried to hide behind her blue uniform, but the more she tried, the more visible she became. She passed a group of secretaries, and they whispered to each other. One of them, unaware that she was speaking too loudly, said, "If I were her, I'd be embarrassed." Grace swallowed, still walking. In the service elevator, Rosa, her shiftmate, noticed her distant gaze. "Hey, Grace, is everything okay?" "Yes, you are," she answered quickly, unable to keep her smile from falling. "That's a lie." Rosa held her hand for a moment. "I know it's heavy." Grace shook her head and said, I just can't fall apart now." Meanwhile, Richard was walking down the main hallway. One intern whispered to another, unaware of the boss's proximity. Colin saw the whole thing. It must have been embarrassing. Richard paused for a second, his blood boiling, but didn't react. He kept his face impassive, as if he hadn't heard. His silence was his armor. Late in the afternoon, Grace returned to the penthouse bathroom to inspect the floor. She found scribbled on one of the stall doors, "Drama Queen." She closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the cool marble wall. Her breath came in short sobs. "Why do they do this?" she murmured to herself. "I just want to work, that's all." The echo of her own voice was louder than she was. Every hallway seemed to be filled with knowledge. With every step, she heard a laugh, a whisper, a uttered word. The entire building seemed to whisper against her. Across the room, Richard watched everything through the glass wall of the office. He saw Grace pushing the cart, her head down, her shoulders heavy. He felt an uncomfortable pang in his chest, but he kept his cool mask. To the employees, he remained the untouchable, indifferent man. Ava, his assistant, ventured a comment. "She's a good worker, sir." "I've never seen anyone clean so carefully," Richard replied without taking his eyes off the laptop. "We're not discussing the quality of the cleaning." But Grace's words kept coming back like a whisper. "My son won't survive the surgery." No matter how hard she tried to bury it, the discomfort grew. In the basement, while putting away supplies at the end of her shift, Grace ran into Rosa again. "Ignore those comments." Rosa tried to cheer her up. "Aha, they don't understand," Grace said, looking down at her own stained hands. "To them, it's just another cleaning job. To me, it's Ethan's future." The lights in the building were fading, but the tension remained. Each floor seemed to harbor a shadow of contempt. Her every step was a challenge. His every silence was an omission that weighed like lead. The subway creaked on its tracks as Grace returned to Queens. Her uniform still smelled of disinfectant, and her eyes burned from holding back tears all day. She climbed the stairs of the old building with heavy steps. Each step seemed higher than the last. She opened the door to the small apartment and was greeted by a smile that brightened any shadow. "Mummy!" Ethan ran to her, wearing dinosaur print pajamas. Grace dropped her bag on the couch and bent down to hug him. She squeezed tightly, as if she wanted to protect him from the whole world. "Hey, champ, have you had dinner yet?" "I made a peanut butter sandwich," he replied proudly, showing off his sticky fingers. Grace chuckled softly, hiding her sadness. "Some chef I have at home." "Huh?" He looked at her with attentive eyes, as if he could read her soul. "Is everything okay, Mom?" She took a deep breath, fixed his hair, and replied with a forced smile, "Yes, my love. Everything is fine." Ethan didn't insist. He ran to the little table and brought out a colorful drawing. "It's us in the park. I put a big sun on it, because you always say that after the rain, the sun comes back." Grace felt her eyes well up. "It's beautiful, Ethan. I'll keep it forever." When he lay down, she waited for her son's breathing to slow and calm. Then she went to the small kitchen, turned off the light, and sat in silence, listening only to the dim streetlight streaming in through the window. She knelt beside the bed, amidst the distant rumble of the subway and the cold seeping in through the crack in the window. "Lord," she whispered, her hands clasped together, "I can't carry this weight alone anymore, but I know you can open a door where there isn't one. Take care of my boy. I just ask for one more chance. That's all." Tears streamed down her face, but this time not of despair. There was a spark of hope hidden in every word. She wiped her face, slowly stood up and looked at Ethan sleeping, hugging the stuffed dinosaur. "It's going to be okay," he murmured, like a promise he needed to believe. That night, Grace closed her eyes as she lay on the couch. her body exhausted, and even with a heavy heart, she allowed herself to dream that tomorrow could be different. The next morning, the mirrored building looked the same, but not to Richard. The hallway smelled of fresh lavender. He passed the elevator mirror and saw his own tired face, a new crease between his eyebrows. "Agenda," she said as she left, never taking her eyes off her phone. "Cut report, press release, and a file left in the copy machine." Ava held up a manila folder. "It's from the facilities team. It had your name on top because they asked for final authorization." Richard grabbed the folder impatiently, more out of reflex than interest. The first few pages were filled with hard numbers. The third had a headline that didn't match the company: Massachusetts General Hospital, Pediatric Cardiac Surgery. Below that, a bold-faced name, Dr. Jonathan Hale. Time took a step back. The sound in the office faded, as if someone had muted the world. Richard touched the paper with his fingertip, slowly. "Ava, repeat the name. Dr. Jonathan Hale. The request is for priority maintenance hours for employee Grace Miller, mother of patient Ethan Miller. It has an office contact and a digital signature." "Hale," he whispered, as if finding a familiar door in a dark hallway. A memory opened in his chest. Sirens, glass, rain on the asphalt of FDR Drive. A firm voice above him, years ago. "Stay with me. I'll bring you back." And then, in the white room, the same name on the name tag, Hale. "Do you know this doctor?" Ava asked. Noticing the change in tone, Richard took a deep breath, his hand moving to his jacket, where the fabric still hid the subtle scar on his left side. "He saved me." The sentence came out low, without poise. 12 years ago, a stupid accident. I shouldn't be here." A cell phone ringing broke the trance. It came from the side hallway, near the pantry. Richard recognized the voice before turning the corner. "Hi? Yes? Is this Dr. Hale's office?" Grace spoke softly, pressing the phone to her ear. "I'm Ethan's mum. I just wanted to check if his name is still on the list. I'm working overtime. I'll get it. Just please don't take him off." Richard's heart gave a strange jolt. A step out of rhythm. He leaned against the doorframe for a second, listening unseen. "Yes, I understand." Grace continued. "I know you need the deposit. I'm fighting for it." Silence. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if stifling a tremor. "Thank you. I'll call you back." Grace tucked her cell phone into her apron pocket, adjusted the cart, and turned around. She saw Richard standing there, manila folder in hand. The two stared at each other for a few seconds that felt like an elevator descending without stopping. "Mr. Collins," she began, already expecting a scolding for using the phone. "What's the name of your son's surgeon?" he asked bluntly. "Dr. Hale." Her voice filled with respect. "They said he's the best." Richard inhaled, as if the air had weight. "He is," he replied, and his own ear found the absence of coldness strange. "Do you know him?" Grace ventured. He glanced at the folder, then at the hidden scar. Often, that mark had been just a reminder of danger overcome. For the first time, it felt like a debt. "He operated on my heart," he said simply. "Without him, I wouldn't be here now." Grace blinked in surprise. The information displaced everything in the hallway, her uniform, his suit, the echo of yesterday's laughter. "So you know what he does?" "I know exactly," Richard interrupted, but not harshly. His tone was different, human. "And I know what it means to depend on that list." Ava appeared, hesitated when she saw them, and took a step back, leaving them in a small circle of silence. Grace clasped her hands together uncertainly. I didn't mean to cause trouble yesterday," she said in a small voice. "It just was too much." "You didn't cause trouble," he answered quickly, surprising himself. From inside the conference room, someone called out, "Collins, we need you here." Richard didn't move. He looked again at the name on the paper, Hale, and the sentence formed itself, clear like a sentence that asked no one's approval. "She's begging for help from the same man who gave me a second chance." At that moment, the building's hierarchy seemed to shift. The invisible cleaner was unknowingly holding the other end of his story, and for the first time, he wasn't the one with the final say on what mattered. "Grace," he called softly. "Yes, sir." Richard closed the folder carefully, as if guarding something precious. His gaze was steady, without the usual ice. "I understand. I was a teacher," Grace said, staring at a spot on the tabletop. "Teacher?" Richard raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. "Literature, public school in Brooklyn." A quick smile passed and disappeared. "I knew every student's name. I knew who pretended to hate reading, who hid poetry in their backpack. I had chalk in their pockets and quotation notes in their pencil case. It was my place." She rubbed her hands together, remembering the texture of the painting. Then came Ethan's diagnosis. Her voice was shaky but firm. "Heart. Medical buzzwords no one wants to hear. Surgery. Queue. Cost." "His father. Is he here?" Richard asked carefully. Grace shook her head. "He left when the first bill arrived. I stayed." Pause. "I always do." The wall clock struck a long minute. Richard didn't interrupt. "During the day, I became a caregiver for a woman in the neighborhood. Baths, medicine, company. At night, cleaning the building." She pointed to the ceiling, as if the entire weight of the building were there. "I sleep 3-4 hours, sometimes less. I do the math with a pen in my notebook. Rent, medicine, subway, food. I cross everything off. I see what's left over. There's almost never any left over. And school," he tried. "I asked for leave, then I quit." She swallowed hard. "Putting my head in a book and pretending I'm not scared. I couldn't do it. I stuck with it. Between school and the hospital, I chose the hospital." Her eyes sought his, not in challenge, but in transparency. "I work fast. I can handle it. I've learned to keep this building sparkling. Some people don't even notice, but I know where the dirt hides. I know the age of each floor, the moment the sunlight hits the glass and reveals the marks, the exact spot on the floor that creaks." Richard heard something new in that statement. Precision, intelligence, mastery. "And you still study?" He pointed with his chin to his apron pocket. Grace smirked. "Literature, medical terms, what the hospital requires. I learn how to talk to nurses, social workers. I write everything down." She pulled a crumpled notebook from her pocket, pages filled with underlined words. Pre-authorization, co-pay, waiver, appointment. "You can't be lost when your child's health is on the table." "You're not lost," he said, before realizing it. She stared at him in surprise. Grace clutched the notebook to her chest. "I don't like crying at work. Yesterday it slipped out." Her eyes welled up. "I always tell myself, stay strong, Grace. Sometimes it works. Sometimes—" She closed her eyes for a second, letting a stubborn tear fall. She wiped it away with the inside of her fist, without making a fuss. "And Ethan?" Richard asked carefully. 8 years old. A different glow lit her face. "He knows every species of dinosaur. He sleeps cuddling a T-Rex. He waits for me with a new drawing every night. He asks if I'll be back before the sun. I say yes." She smiled, fragile and strong at the same time. "He believes in me, so I have to earn that faith." "Why are you telling me all this?" he asked, not harshly. "Because you asked why," Grace answered simply. "And because I'm not a cut on the spreadsheet. I have a boy waiting for pancakes tomorrow morning, and—" His voice dropped to a whisper. "I would do anything to save my boy. Anything fair. Work double, triple. Sweep the whole city if I have to." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with images, a chalkboard, a hospital, a formica table, a notebook with difficult words. Richard leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at a point he couldn't see. "Do you miss the classroom?" "Every day." She laughed softly. "When I'm wiping down the conference tables, I sometimes imagine my students' names on the chairs, and I remember that no one is a lost cause, not even the people who laugh at us in the hallway. A flash of sweet irony crossed her gaze. "Not even you, perhaps." He let out a short, almost imperceptible smile. "Maybe not." Grace put her notebook back and stood up. "I have to finish the floor. The inspection passes today. If there's a smudge on the mirror, it's a disqualification." She adjusted her apron and looked up. "Thanks for listening. It doesn't happen often." She pushed the cart to the door, stopped, and turned around once more. "Just for the record, I don't want pity, I want a chance. I'll go after the rest." A sharp silence echoed through the air. Grace was standing, ready to leave, when Richard looked into her eyes. "Wait a second." He spoke softly, as if he didn't want to startle a bird at the window. She stopped, the stroller leaning against the wall. "Yes, sir?" Richard took a deep breath. He ran his hand along the side of his jacket, right where the scar lay, and then looked at Grace with a sincerity that even he found strange. "You're not going to lose this job," he said, clearly, bluntly, "and I'll pay for your son's surgery." The world went silent for a moment. The clock on the wall seemed to have forgotten how to move. Grace blinked, not understanding at first. "What?" The voice came out in a whisper. "And I'll pay all of it," Richard confirmed firmly. "Hospital, doctor, whatever it takes, and your hours here are guaranteed. Forget the cut." Grace put her hand to her mouth, as if trying to hold her heart. I don't want charity." Her words stumbled. "I just asked not to be taken off shift." "It's not charity," he answered immediately. "It's right. And," she swallowed hard, "it's personal. Dr. Hale saved me. Now it's my turn to honor that." Her eyes widened, her lashes still damp. "But why me? Why now?" "Because you didn't give up when everyone laughed." He shrugged, a small, rare gesture. "Because you fight, because your son believes in you, because yesterday I was a coward, and today I don't want to be." Grace shook her head, trying to organize the avalanche. "I can't pay you back, not in 1,000 years." "You don't have to pay me," Richard cut in calmly. "Oh, just promise me you'll stick it out, and that you'll let Ethan play in the park when the doctor gives you the okay." A nervous laugh escaped her along with a sob. "He loves the swing and strawberry ice cream." "So that's it, swing and ice cream." He gave a small smile. The door opened carefully, and Ava appeared in the doorway, reading their expressions. "Sir?" "Ava, call Dr. Hale's office," Richard said, his eyes never leaving Grace's. "Say it's Richard Collins. I want to cover Ethan Miller's surgery and expedite whatever else is necessary. Ask for the list of documents." "Right now," Ava replied, already taking notes. Before leaving, she gave Grace a respectful, "I see you" look. Grace took a deep breath, as if coming back underwater. "I don't know what to say. Thank you will do." He smiled slightly. "You'll fight me later if I send too many flowers to the hospital room." She laughed through her tears, the most beautiful sound in the entire building. "Thank you. Thank you, my God. Thank you." Richard took a pen from his pocket and pulled a sheet of paper from his pad. "Write Ethan's full name, date of birth, and the phone number the hospital can use to reach you. And this," she hesitated, "if you want, I can take you home tonight so we can talk calmly about what's next." "No need." She smiled shyly. "Just let me tell my son it's going to be okay. Today I can tell the truth." Her hands were shaking, but the letters came out firmly on the paper. When she finished, she looked up. "I'll work twice as hard, I promise." "You already work 3 times as hard," Richard replied sincerely. "Then now it's my turn." They sat in silence for a few seconds, not the icy silence of before, but a warm, respectful silence. Grace wiped away the last of her tears with the back of her fist and straightened her apron. "I still have to review the 39th, he said, a new glow on his face. "Go on." Richard nodded. "And Grace." "Yes, thanks for reminding me what matters." She left, pushing the stroller, her steps light, as if the building had become brighter. Richard held the paper in his hands. A child's name written in blue. For the first time in a long time, the clock on the wall started ticking again. The afternoon fell colder over Manhattan when the phone vibrated on the break room table. It was the hospital number. Grace jumped to answer, her heart pounding. "Hello, it's Ethan's mother." The voice on the other end was professional, without any edges. "Ms. Miller, the insurance company denied initial coverage. Without pre-authorization and the deposit, the surgery will need to be postponed." "Delayed by how much?" The question came out like pushing a heavy door. 3 to 4 weeks at least." The world sank an inch. Grace leaned against the sink, her hand shaking. He can't wait." "I understand." The voice remained the same. "Go to the insurance company and ask for a review of the EOB." The call fell like a weight. Grace looked up at the ceiling and breathed, trying not to collapse. Ava appeared in the doorway, reading her face immediately. "What is it?" "They denied it," she whispered. "They're going to postpone it. Come on." Ava stepped forward. "Let's talk to Richard." In the glass office, Richard received the news with a "let me see" that wasn't cold at all. "Call the hospital, now," he said to Ava. "My card, transfer, whatever." Minutes later, Ava returned, pale. "They only schedule appointments with active pre-authorization, even with a deposit. New hospital policy. They need pre-auth in the system." "Then we'll talk to the insurance company." Richard pointed to the phone. "Give me the number." Grace already had her notebook open, a full page of terms underlined. "I can talk," she said firmly. "I know the way." Ava handed her the phone. Grace pressed it to her ear, like someone holding an oar in the middle of a current. "I'm Ethan Miller's mother. I need an urgent review of the denial. The procedure code is CPT 33533. Yes, I have Dr. Jonathan Hale, S. report." Silence. "I understand the 10-day deadline, but my son doesn't have 10 days. On the other side, there's bureaucracy. Then please connect me to the appeals department," Grace insisted. "I have the cardiologist's notes, the progress, and I can send them now." Richard watched. The invisible cleaning lady spoke a language many executives didn't understand, without stuttering, without asking permission. "I'll stay on the line," she said, jotting down a protocol in the margin of her notebook. "Thank you." The call went on hold. Soft music filled the room. Grace bit her lip, holding back tears. "I can do it," she said, to no one and everyone. "I can do it." Before the music ended, the intercom on Richard's console flashed. It was the CFO. "The committee wants you in room 2. Now." The voice sounded strained. "Subject, unauthorized disbursement." Richard glanced at Ava. She nodded, staying with Grace. He walked down the hall like someone entering a ring. Courtroom 2 had the feel of a courtroom. 5 counselors, files open, eyes assessing. "And they're saying you want to pay for an employee's surgery with company funds," the committee chairman snapped. "They're not saying that right." Richard rested both hands on the table. "It's my money." "Even so, using the corporate structure for a private matter is open to question," another counselor said sharply. "Perception is everything." "Perception of what?" Richard frowned. "Of favoritism, of risk. Today you pay for surgery. Tomorrow there's a line out the door, and if something goes wrong, it makes headlines." The CFO added, "We have a fiduciary duty." Richard suppressed an urge to slam the table. "My duty is to the people too." "Your duty is to the shareholders," the president countered, "and to internal policies." Matter closed. Recommendation: do not proceed. The silence was a subdued growl. Richard straightened his shoulders, icy on the outside, burning on the inside. "Recommendation noted," he said, his voice low and strained. "Decision, no." He left without waiting for a reply. In the hallway, his breath was shallow, his hands clenched into fists. As he turned toward the office, he heard Grace's voice again, this time less confident. "Yes, I can email everything. Yes, write down my address. Please, it's urgent." The line went dead. She stared at the screen for 2 seconds, then dialed again. "We'll try again," she said to Ava. and it was like lifting the world back up again. Richard walked in. "So, appeal open." Grace lifted her notebook, her writing shaky but firm. 3 protocols, 1 supervisor. They'll review it urgently, whatever that means. It means we push it until it becomes a priority. Richard picked up the phone. "Ava, join legal. I want an opinion on mandatory pre-authorization in the face of increased risk. And call the hospital. I want to speak to the administration, not the secretary's secretary." The clock ticked towards 6:40. The city outside was already lighting up its windows. Inside, the air vibrated with nervousness. Security was refusing, the hospital was backing away, the council was freezing. "What if it doesn't work?" Grace asked, finally letting her fear escape. "What if they push it back to next month?" Richard stared out the window at the horizon, as if he could push back time with his hand. "Then we'll move the table." He turned to her. "I'll go as far as it takes." The phone rang. Ava answered on the first ring. "It's the hospital." She put it on speakerphone. The administrative voice came through clearly. "Mr. Collins, we received the intention to pay without active pre-authorization. Our current policy prevents scheduling. We can keep the case as a clinical priority, but without a date." Grace closed her eyes for a second, as if struck in the stomach. "He can't be left without a date," she said quietly. "I understand, Mrs. Miller." The voice remained impersonal. "I recommend you insist on the insurance company." Click. End. Grace clutched her notebook to her chest and collapsed into a chair. The tears came thick and thick, like the sound of breaking wind. "I tried," she sobbed. "I swear I tried." Richard stood nearby, untouched, but close. "You're doing better than half my team could," he said sincerely. "This isn't over." On the other side of the glass, the councillors walked through the hallway, whispering, "Dangerous precedent. PR nightmare. Fine line." With each word, Richard felt the old metal of his own mask trying to return to his face. But there was something else, stronger now, the memory of a voice in the past saying, "I'll bring you back," and the image of a boy in a blue cap waiting for pancakes. Grace took a deep breath, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and slowly stood up. Her eyes still shone, but there was iron in them. "What do I do now?" "Now, you shine," Richard replied, surprising himself with his certainty. "You take all the letters you have, reports, exams, medical history, and organize them into a file. Tomorrow morning, you'll talk to the person in charge at the hospital, not to an attendant, to a decision-maker, and I'll be by your side." She nodded, biting back tears. "Okay, I know how to talk to them. I learned. I know you know how." He held the door for her. "And if they try to silence us for politics, we'll move to another room." Grace pushed the cart out, adjusting her apron like someone wearing armor. The hallway seemed longer, but no longer impossible. The fear was still there, big, dark, but the will to fight was stronger. The sun hadn't even risen yet when the black car pulled up in front of the plain building in Jackson Heights. Grace hurried out, notebook in hand, her uniform exchanged for a worn knit sweater and a grey coat. Ethan would stay with her neighbor until they returned. Richard was already inside the car, a leather briefcase on his lap. "Ready?" he asked bluntly. She took a deep breath. "Nobody's ready for this, but I'm going." The road to Boston felt like a corridor of thoughts. The car window reflected Grace's attentive eyes, reviewing notes, repeating medical terms in a low voice. Appeal letter, urgent review, compassionate grounds. Richard watched her from the corner of his eye. He had never seen anyone turn pain into a method like that. At the hospital, the hallways were too white, smelling of antiseptic and nervousness. A receptionist led them to a conference room, a long table, 3 doctors, 2 lawyers, and an administrator with a clipboard. Their eyes first fell on Richard, his impeccable suit, his presence imposing. But when the meeting began, it was Grace who spoke. "My name is Grace Miller. I'm Ethan's mother, 8 years old, with congenital heart disease." She opened her notebook and placed documents on the table. Dr. Hale has already indicated urgency. Here are the exams, medical history, and protocols I filed with the insurance company. One of the lawyers cleared his throat, as if dismissive. Ms. Miller, we understand, but there are internal processes that take days. Grace interrupted firmly and without raising her voice. And days for my son are life-threatening. I know how to read a report. I know what progressive means. Deterioration means I don't have the luxury of waiting. Silence fell. Richard crossed his arms, suppressing a smile of admiration. The administrator tried to resume. We understand your pain, but protocol must be followed. Grace leaned across the table. Pain is no argument, I know that. That's why I brought data. She turned the page in her notebook. 3 insurance denials. In all of them, the word used was non-essential. But here, she pointed to Dr. Haley's letter, it says essential, life-saving. These are opposite terms, and I demand that a supervisor officially compare them. The doctors exchanged glances. One of them, the youngest, pulled the document toward him. She's right, he murmured. The language doesn't match. Richard finally spoke. Gentlemen, if the issue is cost, it's covered. I'll take responsibility. The question is, are you going to hide behind protocol, or are you going to save a child? Grace didn't look away. She didn't tremble. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an executive, but I know how to be a mother. And a mother doesn't wait in line when her child is running out of breath. The sentence cut through the room like a knife. The older lawyer leaned her pen on the table, thoughtful. We can make an exception for grounds of compassion. We need double approval. Then let's get it now, Grace said. It took hours. Phone calls, signatures, copies. Grace didn't budge. She repeated protocols by heart, quoted pages from the insurance company's manual, and remembered supervisors' names. Each word she spoke dismantled the image of the invisible cleaner. There, in front of doctors and lawyers, she was the most prepared voice in the room. Richard just watched. He didn't interrupt her once. He simply followed her, silent, as if he understood that the leadership that day wasn't his. Late in the afternoon, the administrator returned with a stamped piece of paper. Special authorization, procedure authorized on an emergency basis, surgery confirmed for this week. Grace closed her eyes, put her hand to her mouth, and cried, but not tears of despair. They were tears of victory. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. My son will have a chance. Richard looked at her and, for the first time in years, felt pride that didn't come from a transaction or a profit. Pure human pride. As they left the hospital, the cold Boston wind blew against Grace's face. She lifted her notebook to her chest and smiled at Richard. I never thought I'd walk into a room like this and be heard. You weren't just heard, he replied seriously. You commanded the room. She laughed softly, her heart lighter than it had been in months. I'm just a mom. No. Richard shook his head. You're huge. As they walked back to the car, the city lights came on, and for the first time in a long time, Grace believed she wasn't just surviving, she was winning. But it wasn't over yet. The return from Boston had barely cooled when the committee called a special meeting. A glass-enclosed room overlooking Central Park, screens blaring. Inside, hard stairs. Outside, Grace waited with her notebook on her lap and her simple coat. Richard entered unhurriedly, placed his briefcase on the table, and stood. Let's cut to the chase, he said, looking at them one by one. Ethan's surgery is authorized on an emergency basis. I'll cover all costs. The committee chairman coughed dryly. Even if it comes out of your pocket, the company's brand is involved. Employees are already commenting. Investors are asking questions. Investors ask what exactly? Richard crossed his arms. If you're setting a precedent, if tomorrow another Grace shows up asking for help, if this becomes public company policy, the board member countered. Richard walked to the window, took a deep breath, and returned. Precedent, let it be this. When a child's life depends on ours, we act. The CFO tapped his pen on his briefcase. What about fiduciary duty? What about risk perception? The press loves a moral stumble. A moral stumble is looking the other way, Richard replied firmly. Silence. The air felt heavy. Richard then pulled an envelope from his pocket. Here's the personal commitment letter. It rested in the center of the table. I didn't use a single cent of the company's money. I didn't use a contract. I didn't authorize any corporate expenses. I used my name and my money. If you still think saving a life is a waste of money, he stared at everyone, unblinking, then I no longer want to be part of this empire. The sentence cut through the room. The committee chairman leaned back in his chair, considering. Are you threatening to resign? I'm drawing a line, Richard replied. Mine. The door opened a foot. Grace, nervous, appeared in the doorway. Sorry. The hospital called. She looked at Richard. They want final confirmation from the payer. Now. He walked over to her, without asking the committee's permission. Let's confirm, he said. And before leaving, he looked back at the councillors. If saving a life is a waste of money, you can run this place without me. In the hallway, Grace held his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. Thank you for standing by me. Today and as many times as necessary, he squeezed back. Simply, over the speakerphone, the hospital administrator sounded matter-of-fact. Mr. Collins, we received the exceptional authorization and your personal guarantee. With that, we're taking on the case without insurance pre-authorization. Dr. Hale is organizing the team. Grace stifled tears. He's going to operate? Yes, Ms. Miller. The procedure is scheduled for tomorrow at 7 a.m. Please arrive at 5 a.m. for admission. Grace leaned her forehead against the wall for a second, breathing as if returning to the surface. Oh my God. Thank you, hospital, Richard said sincerely. Send the list of documents. I'll take care of everything. In the early morning hours, the hallway at Massachusetts General Hospital was cold and smelled of antiseptic. Grace walked with her notebook in her hand, Richard beside her with a briefcase and a coffee in his hand. Did you take it? He offered. If I take it, my heart will race. She laughed nervously. But thank you. Dr. Jonathan Hale appeared, his badges waving. Grey hair, calm eyes. Ms. Miller, Mr. Collins. Doctor. Richard extended his hand gratefully. Let's take care of Ethan. Hale smiled at Grace. I remember you, Richard, still with that subtle scar. Discreet and important. He nodded. Thank you for yesterday, today, and what's to come. I'm the one thanking you for your trust. Dr. Hale turned to Grace. We'll do everything safely. It'll last a few hours. I'll be back when it's over. Nurses carried the boy away in his hospital gown. Ethan waved weakly, clutching the stuffed T-Rex. Mom, will you be back before sunrise? Grace swallowed her emotions. I'll be here when you wake up, champ. And we'll go on the swing. Strawberry ice cream. Deal, deal, he whispered bravely. The operating room doors closed with a soft click. Time then became elastic. Waiting room, blue armchairs, slow clock. A muted television showed news that didn't matter. Richard and Grace sat side by side. I'm afraid of silence, she confessed. Then we'll talk, he replied. About anything. About pancakes. She smiled for the first time that morning. Pancakes are great, he smiled back. And dinosaurs, ours. Coffee growing cold. Nurses, footsteps, beeps coming and going. Suddenly, Richard's phone vibrated. A barrage of messages from the committee, headlines, comments. He turned the device face down. Not today, he said, and put it in his pocket. When the door opened, Dr. Hale emerged, removing his cap, his face tired but serene. Grace jumped to her feet, her hands shaking. Doctor! He smiled with his eyes. The surgery was a success. Ethan is stable. His heart responded very well. Now it's recovery. Grace burst into a relieved cry, laughing and crying at the same time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Richard took a deep breath, as if only then remembering to breathe. Thank you, Doctor. Really. You can see him in a few minutes, Hale added. He's going to get some sleep. Then only good news, God willing. Grace turned to Richard, still sobbing with happiness. He did it. My boy did it. He's strong like his mother, Richard replied. Minutes later, at the bedside, Grace held Ethan's small hand, covered in wires and bandages, but at peace. I'm here, my love, she whispered. Mommy's here. Richard stood discreetly behind, respecting the moment, but with a new pride in his chest, a pride that doesn't fit into any report. Outside, day was breaking over Boston, spilling light through the hospital windows. Inside, Victory had the sound of quiet breathing and the smell of life beginning again. On the phone, the committee chairman tried his last card. Collins, the press wants an official statement. Will you take responsibility for that? Richard looked at the boy, at Grace, at Dr. Hale in the background. I'll take responsibility, he said firmly. Write it like this. A company exists to create value, and no value is greater than life. That's not market language. It's human language, he concluded. He hung up, put his phone away, and looked back at the room. Grace squeezed his hand, this time without fear, just gratitude. I won't forget. Me neither, she replied. Outside, the world went on, with charts, headlines, and noise. There, in that room lit by the morning sun, good had won, with intelligence, courage, and dignity. Days after the surgery, the Fifth Avenue building no longer looked the same. The lights reflected off the glass as always, but there was a new, almost invisible feeling in the air, as if something had shifted in the soul of the place. In the lobby, staff members whispered, but this time not in mockery. It was admiration. Grace walked with a firm step, no longer carrying a bucket and broom, but a simple briefcase in her hand. Her new name tag gleamed Social Welfare Coordinator. At the first meeting, he sat at a table with managers who previously hadn't even noticed his presence. When he opened his briefcase and began speaking, everyone fell silent. I know what it's like to go unnoticed. I know what it's like to work and no one sees. This fund we created isn't charity, it's justice. Every employee here has a story, and now they'll have support too. Subdued applause filled the room. Richard, leaning against the glass, watched silently, his expression carrying something rare: pride. That same afternoon, children's laughter echoed through the hallways. Ethan ran between the desks, flushed, wearing a dinosaur print t-shirt and holding his old stuffed T-Rex. He stopped in front of Richard's glass-enclosed office. Mr. Collins, look. He showed a colourful drawing, him on a swing, his mother smiling, and a giant sun behind him. Richard took the paper, holding it up as if it were $1 million contract. How much does this masterpiece cost? $5, Ethan said seriously. Richard laughed for the first time. Deal! Grace appeared in the doorway, her eyes brimming with tears. Thank you for everything. Richard looked at her and replied simply, Thank you. You reminded me of what really matters. The late afternoon sun reflected off the windows of Fifth Avenue. Inside, a boy ran, a mother started over, and a man finally learned to truly smile. End of history.